A hospital hallway. A code blue blaring through the speakers. A child fighting for life.
A
And a
code
security
blue blaring
officer
through the
who made
speakers.
one fatal mistake. He stopped the wrong woman.
A
He
child
demanded her
fighting.
ID. He threatened to arrest her. What he didn't know was that she ran the entire hospital. And those few seconds of bias would cost him everything. Dr. Elena Vargas wasn't just another doctor moving through the hospital halls in faded blue scrubs. To most eyes, she looked like every other exhausted physician pulling a late shift. But inside those walls, she was something far more. Asterisk, asterisk, the chief medical officer, asterisk, asterisk, the highest medical authority in the building. Her title didn't hang on her chest. Her name wasn't announced when she entered a room. She never needed it to be. Years of relentless training had shaped her into someone people trusted without question. Thousands of lives carried her fingerprints. Quiet recoveries, near miracles, children who walked out of ICUs because she refused to give up on them. When pressure rose, Elena didn't raise her voice. She slowed it. That was her power. She worked the night shifts more often than anyone realized. Not for recognition, but because emergencies didn't care about rank, and neither did she. She preferred the moments no one applauded. Checking charts long after meetings ended, mentoring residents who doubted themselves, stepping into rooms where fear had already settled. That night was supposed to be routine. She sat in her office reviewing staff schedules, pencil tapping softly against the desk, adjusting coverage to make sure the pediatric unit wouldn't be short-staffed come morning. Outside her door, the hospital hummed, machines breathing, monitors blinking, life continuing in measured rhythms. Then the sound cut through everything. Code blue. Pediatric ICU. Room 307. The pencil dropped. For half a second, the title of chief medical officer meant nothing. There was no hierarchy in that alarm, only urgency. Elena was already moving. Her feet knew the path before her mind caught up. White coat forgotten, badge clipped inside her pocket. Down the corridor, past startled staff, past the echo of running shoes and rising panic. In room 307, a child was fighting for breath. A heart was faltering. Seconds were already being lost. And Dr. Elena Vargas, trusted leader, silent protector of the hospital, ran toward the crisis, unaware that before the night ended, her authority would be questioned in the most public, painful way imaginable. Dr. Vargas ran, not the frantic kind of running born from panic, but the focused, muscle memory sprint of someone who had answered this call too many times to count. Her shoes struck the polished floor in quick, measured beats. The stethoscope bounced lightly against her chest. Her mind was already in room 307, already calculating doses, already hearing the flatline. She was determined to stop. Every second mattered. Code blue wasn't an announcement. It was a countdown. As she turned the final corner toward the pediatric ICU, the hallway narrowed, lights reflecting sharply off glass walls. Nurses were rushing past with carts. A respiratory therapist shouted instructions over her shoulder. The hospital had shifted into emergency mode, everyone moving with one shared purpose. Save the child. Then just steps from the ICU doors, a body moved into her path. A uniform, a raised hand, a hard stop. Ma'am, stop right there. Dr. Vargas skidded to a halt, breath sharp but controlled. Code blue, she said quickly, already angling to move around him. Pediatric ICU. I'm needed in. Restricted area, the security officer interrupted, positioning himself squarely in front of the doors. I need to see your ID. For a moment, she thought he must be joking. No one joked during Code Blue. I'm Dr. Vargas, she said, pointing to the badge clipped just inside her scrub pocket. I'm a chief medical officer. There's a child. Badge, he repeated, louder now. I need it visible. Hospital policy. Behind the glass doors, she could see movement. Too much movement. The kind that meant things weren't going well. Her pulse quickened. Not with fear, but disbelief. I don't have time for this, she said, keeping her voice calm. She reached toward her pocket. That child is crashing. The officer shook his head. You'll have to wait. Wait. The word landed heavier than any insult. Sir, she said, enunciating each syllable, I am authorized to be here. Please step aside. Instead, he glanced her up and down. Blue scrubs. No white coat. No entourage. In his mind, authority wore a different face. I've never seen you before, he said. And I'm not letting anyone into the ICU without proper identification. Behind him, the doors stayed closed. A nurse rushed up, eyes wide. What's happening? We need another attending now. I'm right here, Dr. Vargas said, turning toward her. The officer raised an arm again. Ma'am, step back. The nurse froze, confusion spreading across her face. That's Dr. Vargas. I don't care who she says she is, he snapped. Rules are rules. Time fractured. The overhead speaker crackled again. Updates Elena didn't want to hear. Heart rate dropping. Oxygen saturation unstable. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not anger, not fear, but a cold, sinking awareness. This wasn't about policy. This was about perception. She pulled her badge free, holding it up. The photo caught the harsh fluorescent light. Her name was clear. Her title unmistakable. Chief Medical Officer. The officer glanced at it, barely a second, then shook his head. I need to verify this. Verify. Her voice finally tightened. A child is dying. Step back, please. Around them, people had started to notice. A resident slowed, then stopped. A respiratory therapist stared. Another nurse whispered, Is he serious? Dr. Vargas stood perfectly still. She could force her way past him. She outranked him. She had the authority. But she also knew what would happen next. Hands, escalation, chaos that would cost even more time. So she did the hardest thing. She waited. Not because she should have, but because she was thinking of the child. Call the ICU attending inside, she said to the nurse beside her. Tell them I'm here. The nurse nodded and ran. Seconds stretched, thick, unbearable. The officer spoke into his radio, his voice clipped. Need confirmation on a Dr. Vargas. Says she's, he hesitated, Chief Medical Officer. The pause that followed was too long. Dr. Vargas stared through the glass doors, her reflection staring back. In it, she saw every night she'd spent in that hospital, every life she'd fought for, every meeting where she'd advocated for better care, better systems, better protection for children who couldn't protect themselves. And now she was being asked to prove she belonged, because in his mind, she didn't look like someone in charge. Finally, hurried footsteps approached. A senior ICU physician burst through the doors, mask pulled down, eyes locking onto Elena. Why isn't she inside? He demanded. The officer turned. I was just following. That's the Chief Medical Officer, the doctor snapped. Move. Now. The doors flew open. Dr. Vargas didn't say a word as she stepped past him. She didn't look back. She didn't argue. She didn't reclaim her dignity. She carried it with her, straight into room 307, where a child's life still hung in the balance, and where the cost of wasted seconds would soon become painfully clear. The officer didn't step aside. Instead, he doubled down, his shoulders squared, his jaw tightened. The stance of someone who believed control mattered more than context. He blocked the ICU doors with renewed certainty, as if repetition could turn a mistake into policy. Ma'am, if you continue to interfere, I'll have to detain you, he said. Detain. The word echoed louder than the code blue alarm still pulsing through the unit. Dr. Vargas felt the air shift around them. The corridor, once filled with motion and purpose, slowed into something heavy and watchful. Staff hovered at a distance now, close enough to see, far enough to avoid becoming involved. She took a slow breath. Years of training had taught her how to steady herself in moments like this. Not just medical crises, but human ones. Moments where emotion threatened to override reason. Where power, fear, and assumption tangled into something dangerous. Officer, she said, her voice even, I am not interfering. I am responding to an emergency. He shook his head. You're refusing to comply. I've complied, she replied, gesturing to her badge still visible in her hand. You're refusing to acknowledge it. His gaze flicked past her, to the nurses, the doctors, the gathering witnesses, then back to her face. Something hardened there. I don't know who you are, he said. And until I do, you're not going anywhere. Behind the glass, silhouettes moved fast. Too fast. The kind of movement that meant compressions had started. The kind that meant a child's small chest was being pressed again and again, hoping for a response. Dr. Vargas felt the seconds slipping, irretrievable. "This is a hospital," she said quietly. "Not a courtroom." But the officer's hand hovered near his radio again, near the cuffs on his belt. Threat replaced judgment. And that was the moment she understood. This was no longer about safety. It was about bias. She lowered her badge, not because it no longer mattered, but because she was done proving herself to someone who had already decided she didn't belong. "You stopped me because of what I look like," she said calmly. Not accusing, not shouting, just stating a fact. Not because of policy. A ripple moved through the onlookers. A nurse's mouth fell open. A resident looked away, ashamed. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The officer scoffed. "Don't play that card." "I'm not playing anything," Dr. Vargas replied. "I'm naming it." Her voice never wavered. "I was in scrubs. I was moving toward an active code blue. I identified myself. I showed my credentials. And still, you chose to see me as a threat instead of a physician." The hallway fell silent, except for the distant alarm. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across his face. But instead of pausing, instead of reassessing, he leaned into authority. "Step back. Now." That was when the ICU doors burst open. A doctor rushed out, gloves streaked with red, mask pulled down in urgency. His eyes locked onto Dr. Vargas with immediate recognition, and then shifted to the officer in disbelief. "What's she doing out here?" he demanded. Before anyone could answer, another voice followed, sharp, commanding. "Why is our chief medical officer being blocked during a code blue?" A senior charge nurse emerged, eyes blazing. More staff poured into the hallway now, drawn by the raised voices and the gravity of what was happening. The officer turned, suddenly outnumbered. "I was just following protocol." "There is no protocol that stops the CMO from responding to an emergency," the ICU doctor snapped. "We've been calling for her." Dr. Vargas didn't move. She let the truth speak for itself. The charge nurse looked at the badge in her hand, then back at the officer. "She's been our medical chief for 6 years. 6 years. 6 years of leadership. 6 years of trust. 6 years of being the final call when things went wrong." The officer's face drained of color. I needed verification," he stammered. "Verification cost us time," the doctor shot back. "Move." The officer stepped aside, finally, but the damage had already been done. Dr. Vargas walked into the ICU, the doors closing behind her with a quiet finality. The room was a storm of motion, compressions, medications, shouted vitals. She moved seamlessly into place, hands steady, voice clear, command absolute. For the team, her presence was grounding. For the child, it was hope. Outside the room, the hallway buzzed with murmurs, shock, anger, disbelief. What should have been unthinkable had unfolded in full view. Bias had replaced judgment. And in a place where seconds meant life or death, that substitution came at a terrible cost. One that would soon force the hospital to confront a truth it could no longer ignore. "This is Dr. Vargas," the ICU physician shouted, his voice cutting through the hallway like a blade. "She's the chief medical officer." The words landed hard. For a brief, suspended moment, everything stopped. The code blue alarm still pulsed in the background, but the corridor itself fell into stunned silence. Conversations froze mid-breath. Shoes stopped moving. Even the air felt heavier, as if the truth had pressed itself into the walls. The officer's face drained of color. The authority he thought he carried, borrowed from a uniform and a misplaced sense of control, evaporated in real time. His posture shifted, shoulders sagging, eyes darting as he searched for something solid to stand on. There was nothing, because the truth had arrived, and it was undeniable. "That can't be," he began. "It is," the charge nurse said sharply. "Check the directory. Check your system. Check anything you want. But step aside." He hesitated, just long enough for the weight of his mistake to settle fully into his chest. Around them, staff stared openly now, not with curiosity, but with something closer to recognition. They weren't just witnessing a misunderstanding. They were watching the collapse of a false assumption that should never have been made in the first place. Dr. Vargas stood still. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Her silence carried more authority than any argument could. The officer swallowed. His hand dropped from his radio. He stepped back, clearing the doorway that had cost so much time already. I'm sorry," he muttered, the words barely audible. Dr. Vargas didn't respond, because this moment wasn't about him. She glanced once at the clock mounted above the ICU doors. The numbers burned into her memory. Minutes lost, seconds wasted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Not to call a lawyer, not to make a scene. She documented time, location, names, witnesses. Short, precise notes typed with the same calm focus she used when recording a patient's vitals. Facts only. No emotion. No commentary. Because accountability didn't require anger. It required accuracy. The ICU physician watched her, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just a doctor stepping into a crisis. This was a leader ensuring the system would never pretend this moment hadn't happened. Then she locked her phone, clipped it back in her pocket, and walked forward. Past the officer, past the stairs, past the whispers. She didn't look at him as she passed, not out of spite, but because she refused to center him in a moment that belonged to a child fighting for life. Inside the ICU, the chaos swallowed her immediately. "Status?" she asked, already pulling on gloves. 5 minutes into compressions, a resident replied, voice tight. No response to the last dose. Dr. Vargas moved to the bedside, her presence immediate and grounding. "Switch compressors," she ordered calmly. "Prepare epinephrine. Increase oxygen flow." Her voice cut through the noise, not loud but certain. Hands moved faster. Voices steadied. The room aligned itself around her. She placed her hands where they needed to be, feeling the fragile resistance beneath her palms. A child's chest, too small, too still. "Again," she said. "Now." The monitor flickered. Flat. Then something. "Wait," she said, eyes locked on the screen. "There. Do you see that? A blip. Hope. Fragile but present." "Continue," she instructed. "Don't stop." Seconds stretched. Then a rhythm emerged, weak, uneven, but real. "We have a pulse," someone whispered. Dr. Vargas exhaled, slow and controlled. "Good. Maintain. Let's stabilize." The room shifted from desperation to determination. She stayed until the child was stable, until the machines hummed in steadier patterns, until the frantic energy softened into cautious relief. Only then did she step back. Outside the ICU, the hallway buzzed again, but this time with a different tone. Not confusion, not disbelief, reckoning. The officer stood against the wall, smaller now, silent. No longer the gatekeeper he'd imagined himself to be. Dr. Vargas exited the room, removing her gloves. She met the eyes of the charge nurse, who nodded once. Respect, gratitude, apology, all rolled into one. "Thank you," the nurse said quietly. Dr. Vargas gave a small nod in return. "Make sure the family is updated." Then she turned and walked away, not toward applause, not toward confrontation, toward her office, toward the report that would follow. Because the child had been saved, but the system still needed to answer for the seconds it had stolen. And Dr. Elena Vargas, chief medical officer, had never believed that saving lives ended at the bedside. After the surgery, Dr. Vargas didn't go home. She didn't sit in the quiet room. She didn't let adrenaline carry her into exhaustion. She sat at her desk. The hospital was settling back into its nighttime rhythm, machines humming, footsteps fading, but her focus sharpened. She opened a fresh document and began to write. Not emotionally, not dramatically, precisely. Names, times, exact words spoken. Who stood where? Who witnessed what? How many minutes were lost? What policies were cited, and which ones were misused? She attached security logs, badge scans, camera timestamps, internal directories that clearly listed her role. This wasn't retaliation. It was record. By morning, the report was complete. By afternoon, it was unavoidable. Human resources reviewed it first, then legal, then the board. And once the truth was fully assembled, there was nowhere left to hide. The officer was terminated effective immediately. Not suspended, not reassigned, fired. The investigation revealed a pattern. Other complaints, other misunderstandings, other moments where judgment had been replaced by assumption. His career in hospital security ended quietly, permanently, without ceremony. But the consequences didn't stop there. The family of the child, shaken, furious, heartbroken by how close they'd come to loss, was informed of everything. Not a sanitized version, not a corporate statement. The truth. The hospital settled $4.2 million, not as an admission of guilt, but as an acknowledgement of failure. And with that settlement came something the hospital could no longer delay. Change. Mandatory bias training for all security and administrative staff. Clear emergency override protocols that could not be blocked by appearance or assumption. Real-time verification systems so no physician would ever again be forced to prove they belong during Code Blue. System-wide reforms, written into policy, enforced by consequence. At the press conference, Dr. Vargas stood at the back of the room. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because leadership isn't always visible, and power doesn't always announce itself. A reporter asked the hospital CEO if the chief medical officer felt vindicated. He paused before answering. She never asked for vindication, he said. She asked for accountability. That night, Dr. Vargas finally went home. She checked her phone once more before setting it down. A message from the pediatric ICU blinked on the screen. Stable. Resting. Prognosis improving. Asterisk, asterisk. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. Not in relief over the fallout. Not in satisfaction over the firing. Not in pride over the reforms. But in gratitude that a child would live. Dr. Vargas never raised her voice. Never insulted. Never demanded respect. She stood firm when it would have been easier to explode. She documented when others would have argued. She trusted the truth to do what anger never could. And long after the headlines faded, long after the settlement checks were signed, the hospital remained changed because one woman chose quiet power over loud outrage. Not because she shouted, but because she refused to be erased. This was never just about an ID check. It was about how bias can override common sense, how power is questioned when it comes in the wrong package, and how dignity is too often delayed until damage is done. Dr. Vargas didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability, and in doing so, she changed a system, so the next doctor wouldn't have to prove they belong, while a life is slipping away. Because real authority doesn't demand respect. It earns it.